and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello, and welcome to Podcast UFO on the Dark Matter Radio Network. This is Michael Lauck, filling in for Martin Willis. Martin is still on his globe-trotting ways. If you are following him on our very active Facebook page, you might know that he has actually sprained his ankle, so now he is having a vacation full of downtime and boredom. I wouldn't be surprised if he is listening now, even though there is a substantial time difference between us here in the States and him here, or he there, wherever he is. I am not even going to try to pronounce the name of this town. I don't know if anybody else has seen it. It's about 18 letters long. And then when I was like, wow, that's quite a name, he sent me the name in Cyrillic as if that was going to clarify it for me. It didn't, Martin, if you're listening. I still don't know where you are. But we're hoping you feel better. I'm Michael Lauck. If you have been a longtime listener, you probably know that I used to do the news before Alejandro. And then once the shows went live, I kind of drifted off into the sunset. Still write for the show occasionally and fill in as a guest host here and there. What have I been doing? Because I do have some people ask me that. When I left, I was very sick. Some people are aware of that. Ended up having something called celiac disease, which is it's explained as a gluten allergy a lot. It's not. It's actually my body treating the proteins in gluten as if it was a disease. It's a really weird kind of thing, but I'm feeling a lot better now. I'm actually doing martial arts again and starting to look at going back into my career as a professional magician. And so I'm doing pretty well all the way around. Thanks for asking. I also have a new book out, which I know has been mentioned on our Facebook page as well. If anybody wants to check it out, it's called The Grand Tournament. You can find it on Amazon in paperback or ebook. It's not a UFO book. Sorry to disappoint. It is if you're high-minded, it is a English language take on the Chinese wuxia literary tradition. If you are low-minded, it is a kung fu movie you can read. So if either one of those grabs you, check it out on Amazon. One other little bit of business. We don't do, as you all know, the astronomy so much anymore on the show. But I want to mention to all our listeners, particularly in North America, there is a lunar eclipse this weekend, this Sunday night. Go out and check it out. You should be able to look up on the internet where and when is going to be the best location for you in your area to see it. But get out there and skywatch, It's a great hobby, and if you're looking for the UFOs, it's a good thing if you know what's already supposed to be up in the skies. So, get a cheap pair of astronomy binoculars. They're not that much. They're way easier to use in a telescope and start skywatching. Now, with all that business aside, let's get to tonight's guest and into the show. Tonight's show is going to be 2 hours free for everyone. As you know, we're switching supporter platforms here at Podcast UFO. That should all be arranged shortly after Martin returns, and Martin will be back next week. So this week is free for everybody. Enjoy. It's going to be 2 hours with our guest, Mr. William Grabowski, who is the author of Black Light, Perspectives on Mysterious Phenomena, and a bunch of fiction, which we're going to talk about as well as how we went from fiction to nonfiction and why he's in this whole paranormal mess to begin with. And that seems like a great time to just go ahead and say, William, are you there?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on, Michael.
All right. Do you prefer William or Bill?
we can go with Bill.
Bill it is. Okay.
Yes.
The easiest way to do, we're always going to have somebody in the audience going, okay, this guy wrote a book on paranormal phenomena. Why should I care what he thinks? So let's just be point blank and say, why should we care what you think as opposed to anyone else out there?
Sure. And I ask the same question every time I see a new book that, treating the subject of UFOs, related paranormal phenomena, and basic forte and weird things. And I guess I preface it with, as opposed to a great deal of those books, I'm probably about, as I mentioned to George Knapp, probably about a 98% on that scale. And my purpose in writing Black Light was basically to deconstruct everything I'd ever read or encountered about UFOs, paranormal phenomena. By the way, which I'm one of the psychosocial people. Hopefully not just a psycho. I think the two related. But in my book, I pretty much deconstruct those and try and take as much of the noise out of the signal as I can and strip it down to the raw data. Now, I'm not the first guy to do this, but I think I don't know if recently that's been the approach in a lot of books. I'm seeing kind of a return to a lot of pure irrationality, worship of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and Black Light pretty much tells you why I think this way and how I got there, and like what do I make of we're all sick of hearing about Roswell, but I have a chapter on that, and just the UFO phenomenon in general. So I guess that's free to why I wrote the book. And why should anyone care? Well, they don't have to, but they're not going to get, in Black Light, they're not going to get the same old, I want to believe attitude, because as I mentioned in my introduction, I don't want to believe. I don't believe. I just want to understand. And of course, you're jumping into a pit of snakes with that attitude. But that's the thing. I would rather really know what's going on, if it's possible to ever know, and to kind of have a religious, a faith in it.
Okay, and just so everybody knows, I asked the question that bluntly because I've read the book and I figured you're the kind of guy you would take that and not bat an eye, not be offended. So I hope
Pardon me? Oh no.
Yeah, and so I want the listeners to know that that's kind of the attitude of the book is you are very blunt and outspoken, and you're going to say what you think, which is definitely a good way to be. Before we get into the book a little bit, let's talk about you so people know who they're listening to. You are an author, and you've written what is it, 7 other novels, or actual novels, not nonfiction books, and a whole slew of short stories. What is your usual genre? What are you usually writing?
Okay, well, I do a lot of jumping back and forth. When I first started out, pardon me, I was writing for a horror magazine called The Horror Show back in the early 80s. I was with them for 5 years. They ended up winning World Fantasy Award, and my job there I was hired to interview horror writers. I got to interview Dean Koontz, Clive Barker, Joe R. Lansdale, who was a big guy in Texas. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Oh yeah, Lansdale
he wrote the book
Bubba Hotep, right?
Oh, I was just going to say this.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, yes, so you do know. Yeah. So yeah, I know Joe pretty well. But anyhow, that's how I got my start. I started in nonfiction, was trying to get short stories published. A lot of rejections. So I actually got 98 rejections before my first acceptance, and then moved on through the 80s into trying to write a novel, which I eventually did. And now I do a lot of, I do a lot of freelance work and ghostwriting. I've written a movie tie-in to a forthcoming movie called Castro's Cadillac, which is about a group of middle-aged guys who hatch a plot to basically rip off Castro's classic car collection. But one of these guys is an ex-CIA agent. And I also write, but I would say, to answer your question, primarily, I weird fiction, like horror-based fiction, with a mix of surrealism. That's primarily what I do. But I also do a heck of a lot of ghostwriting in all genres.
That's actually my background as well. That's the best. I've written 3 books on golf and never actually played a full game of golf.
It is possible.
Yeah, I mean that's the business. It's a crazy one. So that's a little bit of your background. Now you've interviewed some real horror greats in the genre of horror literature.
Yes.
You also in this book, in Blacklight, you obviously have a great deal of respect for John Keel. Did you know John Keel?
I met him very, very briefly in 2003 at it was the second, they have a festival in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the Mothman Festival. And it was just held this past weekend. And it started in 2002, and Keel was there signing a bunch of books. And I knew he was in there. They have a place there called the Mothman Museum, which is, if you're into the whole Mothman deal, it's mind-blowing. And of course, they have props from the Mark Pellington movie and everything. But anyhow, Keel was in there. He was coming out after a book signing, and he was being led out. And I thought, my God, he's probably exhausted because he was in his 70s by then. But what I didn't know was that his eyesight was almost gone. He was basically blind. And when he was coming out, I introduced myself, said hello to him, and we spoke very briefly. And then he went outdoors. By the way, he was dressed in a white suit with a black shirt with wraparound shades. He was kind of like the anti-Man in Black. And he really stood out in Point Pleasant. And they were dedicating there is a stainless steel sculpture of the so-called Mothman entity right across the street from this. Well, right now it's next to the museum because they moved it. And that day they had dedicated this sculpture, and Keel was out there to be photographed and give a speech. And so, yes, I did meet him. It was very brief. But he has had a huge influence on me, mostly in how I approach the material, not so much how I feel about it and write about it, because he was very skeptical. But then he also wrote some things where you're thinking, now, is he making this up, or does he honestly, because he would seem to lapse into like the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and then you turn the page and he's saying it is very unlikely that UFOs are from, another, from some extrasolar planet. So in a way, he's hard to figure. But yeah, I have massive respect for him because he kind of had a no BS attitude, I would say, most of the time, and he maintained a journalistic, kind of almost a deadpan style, and he had a sense of humor, which is very much lacking in ufology.
Yeah, I always kind of got the impression from his books that he was trying to keep the journalistic, just the facts, we don't know where, but was also at times wrestling with, at times thinking, well, obviously it's an alien, or obviously it's this, and then catching himself or changing his mind. And that's, to me, that always added a kind of a real quality to the book that, there's nothing worse, I think, in this genre of explanation than opening a book and someone starts stating things as if they are empirical facts, 100% obvious, like they're going to explain it all to you. Because it's like, I know you don't have the answer.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's always bitten at me ever since, God, way back in the in the ancient days of the 70s when I first read Mothman Prophecies. As much as that book scared the crap out of me, I realized, some of these things in here, these have got to be subjective experiences, if not all of them, And this Teal guy, is reporting him. And what you just said about him really is interesting to me, that Teal did not really edit out his mistakes or his inner conflicts. He gave it to you all. Like you just mentioned, he would say, well, obviously it's got to be this and that. And then a page later, he would say, well, probably not. And which may sound hinky, but Teal actually, if you're reading his books, you're seeing his mistakes, and then you're seeing him either apologize for them or saying, well, I was wrong about that, and I'm willing to admit that my thoughts can evolve, especially, when you're dealing with this subject matter. No one has the answers, and those who say they do, and I probably made that mistake myself a few times, they're either lying to you or they're just mistaken, or there's an ego problem going on there.
Let's jump into the book here, because there are. You mentioned that you talk about Roswell. That always pricks up people's ears. People love Roswell. It's the I don't know. It's the Gone with the Wind of ufology at this point. I don't know what it is.
Good way to put it. Yeah, it is. And it never will go away.
It won't go away. But it's not going to go away because it always struck me. I mean, and you seem to think that the government is kind of using flying discs as a cover up for something else. It always struck me that if the government wanted this to go away and stay away, it would have, because they have done such kind of flat-footed, silly things, particularly in that last round of explanation a few years back. Would you care to share with everybody your thoughts on what went down with Roswell, since you are not a believer in aliens crashing into the desert necessarily?
Right. No, I'm not. And it's just to clarify that a little bit. I would never rule out. I'm almost there got to be other life somewhere in this vast universe or multiverse, because what a hell of a waste of space if there isn't. But I don't think they've been here. I don't. And regarding Roswell, I have changed slightly, though, my opinion from what I wrote in Black Light. Black Light, I was going with this theory that the writer Martin Cannon came up with, that possibly involved biological warfare, some sort of a test that failed, and a lot of people died from it. And the reason I was going with that was because, based on the documentation and the opinion of Cannon, and let's admit, a lot of it was opinion, he came across some evidence that there were a lot of deaths in Roswell after in 47 and following, seeming like a lot at the same time. And he was trying to draw between that and, well, what would kill a lot of people quickly? Well, some kind of microorganism, a plague. And so that's kind of where he came up with that. But as I read the book and thought more about that, I'm thinking, well, that's a theory, but it just seems like something that dangerous, with the possibility of massive lawsuits forever up to this present day. Why would there be that kind of a risk taken? So now I'm almost going back to what which of the most well-known, let's just call them skeptics, people more skeptical than me, are saying, it was a goddamn mobile flight. And I'm 99% with that. I do think it was a balloon flight, because you go back and look at the original reports and some of those photographs, even though the supposed debris package was described as, well, it didn't weigh much, like 8 or 10 pounds, and then you see the photos from the military office, and it's just this little bit of foil material and some sticks and stuff. I think that's honestly what happened. And of course, the cover-up comes where the government did not want anyone to know, especially the Russians, excuse me, that we were sending up this balloon to listen for their atomic bomb tests, because that would have been an admission that the United States, number one, knew they had bombs, and then if they were to find out, they knew we were listening, and they knew we were afraid. And at that time, people were extremely terrified of a nuclear attack. This was 2 years after World War II had ended. And I'm thinking that's where, any missing files and stuff, it's all due to that was deeply, deeply classified. And what better way to hide it than to start out with that press release, that they had recovered a flying disc, because that's all anyone is ever going to look for. And pretty much that's held in place to this day.
Now, you'll excuse me if I play devil's advocate, because I guarantee there are people listening out there whose heads are exploding right now.
Oh, I know it. And hopefully they can't find my house.
But let me start with this one. One of the big issues that I have always had with the simple weather balloon theory is ranchers around that air base frequently found weather balloons, and returned them because there was a reward for them. Because half of how you know what the weather balloon is telling you is where it landed in comparison to where you launched it. So
exactly.
So I'm not sure why this if it was a weather balloon, which would be full of weather balloon pieces, no one has ever claimed that it was some kind of amazingly different weather balloon. It was not new weather balloon technology. I'm not sure there is new weather balloon technology even today. Having launched a few weather balloons myself, why would there be so much excitement over just another weather balloon, other than the fact that somebody was going to get the $5 or $10 reward for finding it and turning in the relevant information?
Well, because of this one, now I'm saying supposedly, had the instrumentation package and the microphones, the really specialized classified equipment, listening for the Russian A-bomb tests. If that's indeed what that was, that's all I'm saying. And no one ever reported that they found, like the rancher, he never said he found an instrumentation package, although if he had, that may have been one instance where he was told, we can't have the public knowing that this instrumentation package was found, because then it's going to get out that this was not just a regular weather balloon. But again, that's supposition also.
We have somebody on our chat boards, and I'd like to announce to everybody out there listening to Podcast UFO Live, the chat room is working once again on the Podcast UFO website, podcastufo.com. So come on down and join us and throw in your questions. Here is a question from the chat boards, and it's a direction I was going to go anyway, and that's Chad who asks, why would they fly the material to Wright Air Force Base if it was something that the people at the Roswell base should have understood?
Well, that is a damn good question. But as far as I understand it, even even that fact is up in the air. Like, is there documentation proving that stuff is falling the right field? I don't know if there is. There might be. I'm just saying that there might be. If there is, I'm not sure I've read it. And by saying that, I mean the actual, the documents that say, okay, this was received.
Right.
But if it was that actual package, and they knew what it was, why would it be flown there? Well, that's a good point, and that's also why I stress that I'm only a 98% skeptic. Okay. I'm still leaving the door open a little bit, even as regards Roswell.
Now, have you ever run across, in looking at Roswell, another question I'm going to throw out there? Because like I said, I know heads are exploding over Roswell. They always are. There's
yes.
I mean, it's like, if you want to pick a fight at any given time, anywhere, you can do pretty much one of 3 or 4 things. You can state a political opinion, you can make fun of the local baseball or football team, whichever is in season, or you can start talking about Roswell. One of those is going to get somebody angry at you. So,
it's the equivalent of
we might have to explore this more. Somebody on the chat room is saying that there was a Freedom of Information Act document that does say material was flown to Wright. So we might need to look into that. And
all right, I sit corrected.
And the other thing that I was going to mention is, have you ever come across, if you dig into the local Roswell papers, there were disc sightings in the area, actual disc sightings in the area before that storm and before that the material was found. Have you ever run across any of that? There was the most famous one is a couple on their porch who watched a disc.
Yeah, I am aware that there were disc sightings before the supposed crash. Yeah, undoubtedly. And yet the other side of that is that, look where Roswell was close to. A lot of testing was going on. They were firing V2 rockets, but of course a V2 does not look like a disc. But anyhow, advanced prototypes of something were being tested, so that could explain that. And then on the other hand, it might not. But yeah, I am aware that there were definitely sightings before the crash. Sightings of disc-shaped objects, that is.
Okay, and we're not. I'm not giving up on Roswell yet. We're gonna beat this horse a little bit longer. One of the things that you say in your book, and you've mentioned, you were kind of thinking that there was some kind of a bio warfare project going on. Is that the flying disc explanation was an attempt to divert any investigators away from what was actually going on and get them just on a complete wild goose chase.
Yes.
My question is, given the fact that we are just a couple of years out from World War II, we are staring, in this who's going to blink first contest already with the Soviets and starting everything else up. America, although war weary, I would think still would have had very much that, to quote a cartoon, we did it before and we can do it again. We are the strong arm of freedom and democracy, and we if we have to, we can take it, and we can win this and we can fight this out. Which is why we were doing things like saying, "Oh yeah, if the bomb gets dropped, just get under your desk, kids. Don't worry about it."
Yeah, I recall those drills when I was in kindergarten.
Isn't admitting that there are flying discs of some sort? Isn't that all? And isn't throwing out this kind of alien BS cover story? Isn't that almost inviting people to feed into the fear of maybe this is something we couldn't win? Isn't that almost like bringing up the one enemy that we couldn't just take our Yankee can-do spirit against? Isn't it kind of a bad cover story? I guess that's the crux of my question.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would think that that shows, if that's in fact what, if this was a cover story, and it seems like it was, that it was sort of a bad idea and probably not very deeply thought about. Today, everything's extremely complicated today, and that, God, what would happen if that kind of a story were used? I don't know, but you're right. That almost is a setup for failure, because other writers have mentioned that, okay, let's say they actually had a craft from somewhere else in 1947. They would have wanted help from other countries with this thing because they would not have known what to make of it. I'm not saying they would have asked the Russians for help, but it would have been like almost impossible to keep that secret because they would have had hundreds of people involved in looking at it, and none of that's ever leaked, so to speak. But yeah, as far as that cover story, let's call it a flying saucer. It's either worked so well that it's now completely annoying, or it was just, well, actually, it's both. I think it was bad idea to use it as a cover, because it is attracting attention to a phenomenon that they don't want to be bothered with. At least it seems that way these days, even though that someone's got to be paying attention to some reports, someone at NORAD or elsewhere, just for security is airspace kind of things.
Oh yeah, I mean it's irresponsible to not have anyone looking at a report of an unknown object in the sky. So there's definitely someone collecting some type of data, even if it's local airports. Another thing about the cover story, I am kind of a pop culture guy. I am with you there. I look at things. I am a big proponent of the theory that the War of the Worlds broadcast, for example, was not the big panic-causing monstrosity that people have since claimed. That was. I mean, if you dig into that, there's a lot of evidence that was newspapers trying to discredit radio, who were cutting into their news business for the first time.
Yes.
I mean, heck, newspapers themselves listed War of the Worlds that night as being on the radio. And I look at where aliens were in pop culture up until right around 1947. And you have your amazing stories and your pulp magazines and your tales of rocket men and fist fights with tentacled beings and all kinds of great stuff like that, which I love.
Some of the best cover art ever seen.
Exactly. But one of the things that has struck me is if you had to go out in 1947 America, 1946 even, let's just take it right before this really blew up, and say, can you name someone from another planet? Can you talk about, can you give me an example of an alien? I don't think most people are going to come up with Deja Thorne, the Princess of Mars, from the Barsoom books of Edgar Rice Burroughs or anything like that. I think by far the most popular alien in America, probably the world, was appearing in newspapers every day in strips, was on the radio, and in comic books, and that's Superman. And here's a guy, he didn't come in a flying saucer, he came in a rocket ship, but he landed, he looks like us, he's standing up for America, everybody loves Superman. I don't know that we would have necessarily been quite so terrified if somebody wasn't leading us to be quite so terrified. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned pop culture, because that is another huge, it's a topic I think about constantly, about the influence of pop culture on how people think, and to use a Carl Jung word, archetypes, and how deeply those affect us. And you pretty much explained that right there. Yeah, who would have been the figure, even though a so-called extraterrestrial, but a human-looking person, Superman, obviously huge, and in the comics, and then I think that the original television show, I don't know if that started in the 50s or if that was actually on
it started
earlier. I think it was.
It was the 50s on the tail end of the radio show, and there would have been the Fleischer cartoons, I believe, right around then. The rotoscoped, really right. Cool. Yeah.
Because they were the guys who created them. We're from Cleveland, where I was born. Not that means anything. I just thought I'd throw that in there. But there's a book by this guy named Ken Hollings. Maybe you know about it. It's called Welcome to Mars: Politics, Pop Culture, and Weird Science in 1950s America. And it's the most complete breakdown of how culture affects our thoughts. This guy covers everything from like 50s, architecture and Frank Lloyd Wright comic strips, pulp fiction, and he shows like an evolution in how it affects how people think about paranormal phenomena and UFOs. And it feeds into exactly what you're saying about what would have been in people's consciousness during the Roswell times.
Yeah, I have a copy of that somewhere, and I have not read it. I believe my wife, quote unquote, cleaned up for me. And I have no idea where that book is. I need to find it, because that kind of leads into something that you frequently hear people say. We see grays because of close encounters. We see.
Oh yeah, right.
Our community, and it's like, well, but that was kind of based on what people were always. So there's a lot of arguments there, but to me, what has never quite made sense is if that is the case, were people seeing Vulcans in the 70s? Where is a lot of people don't realize how huge in America, at least, and I know we're talking to an international audience.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't realize how huge what quote unquote Dalek mania was in the early 60s in Britain when Doctor Who, the television show, was first on, introduced some of the most alien looking aliens ever to be on television at that point or in movies. And Daleks were so huge that, I mean, they made 2 American Doctor Who movies, even though the television show had never been on over here with Peter Cushing, and it was everywhere. So like where are the Dalek influenced UFO reports of the 60s and things, and there always seems to be a disconnect to me with that some of that pop culture influence just doesn't quite seem to be there. What do you think?
I'm thinking that its influence is not. It doesn't saturate the collect much as the way it's written about. Ken Hollings covers that, though. I'm not saying he's trying to push this where, yes, this explains that, because you make a good point about, I was just reading about this, like, why are there no reports from the 70s, right? There was a flat in 1973, and then, that's right before everybody starts reporting abductions, and why has there never been a single report of, a spot-looking extraterrestrial in an abduction report? Not one, Well, if there was, it wasn't reported. And then you're talking about the Daleks and Doctor Who. I have or had relatives from England, and they first started visiting when I was very young, in the 60s, and they talked about Doctor Who. Of course, I didn't know what they were talking about because we didn't have it on, at least in Northeast Ohio, until the early 80s on public broadcasting, right?
Same in St. Louis.
Oh, okay, so you saw it. But yeah, it's making too strong of a point about the influence of pop culture. The influence is definitely there, but it can't be as deep as maybe some have tried to get us to believe. Because where are the Dalek reports? The UK landings and stuff like that.
And even in a more generalized way, it seems to me that pop culture tends to actually ride the wave more than anything else. I mean, you'd got a definite Space Brother Intergalactic Federation feel from the contactees well before Star Trek.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
I've seen Star Trek blamed for that, people saying that the aliens are going to come and they're going to save it, and they're benevolent. And it's like, well, yeah, but George Adamski, who I will go on the record as saying I think the guy was full of it, but George Adamski was saying this stuff, 15, 20 years before, and as were other people, and it seems like a lot of times that a lot of researchers don't follow a trail all the way back, and they find their explanation and they sit on it.
Yeah, that's another huge mistake. I found that you can tell by someone's particular book. Hopefully not mine, because I'm somebody who's actually read the literature. I'm not just saying popular literature. I mean the reports from pre-Christian times, all the way up to the airship reports in the 1890s. And I'm just saying it does you well to know the literature. Like you mentioned Adamski, read tons about Adamski. In fact, I think the very first UFO book I ever had was from my uncle, and it was Inside the Spaceships. It was this hardcover book, which was like 1954 or something like that. And it was all water stained, and my uncle gave it to me, and I read it, and God, I was probably 10. It scared the crap out of me because it had those photographs in there of these black and white photos of these giant cigar-shaped craft with these orbs coming out of them and discs. But yeah, Adamski was describing, I mean, even the clothes he was describing, these extraterrestrials was wearing, they were these science fictional, like colorful, tight-fitting deals with the silver belts, and it's almost as though pop culture has more effect on the fashion of how things look, not necessarily how we think about them. It's almost like a visual thing, where you're right in saying where pop culture seems to ride the wave of what's actually happening, not so much setting trend, but it's definitely an effect. But by mentioning Adamski, you're right. He was talking about the stuff, well before Star Trek and Space 1999 and any of those shows.
I love Space 1999.
It was great. If you can get past the premise, it was a pretty well done show.
I will give. Well, we're just going to take a sci-fi segue here for a second, folks. So I recently started rewatching Space 1999 because it showed up on Hulu, and I'm a huge fan of another live action group, the same group did, called UFO. Which if you've never seen UFO, you should check it out.
I have seen it. God, it's so colorful.
It's so awesome. Yes. Evidently, if you work on the moon, you have to wear a pink wig, which is good to know. But even in Space 1999, I noticed, which I never picked out as a kid, that even in that, there are several episodes where they just flat out say, it makes no sense for us to be alive, for this to have happened. This is and so they do throw that out there. They do admit that the premise is completely insane.
You know what? I had forgotten that aspect. They do mention it, and if I recall right, the way they mention it, it's almost a kind of like a doubt of what level of reality they're experiencing. Like, how could it's the moon? How could this happen? And how, even if it did break away, how could it travel so fast and enter other solar systems during their lifetimes? And they did acknowledge it. You're right.
Yeah, because I was surprised. I have to, when it popped up a while ago, I had to, I was like, I don't think I've seen this since I was about 11 or 12 years old. And darn it, I'm gonna watch it, and it is awesome. So everybody out there, if you haven't ever caught Space 1999, it's a good one. If you like really dry, no action British science fiction.
That's more for the intellectual crowd.
Yeah. And then UFO, which didn't get a lot of U.S. airplay, and you can find on things like Hulu and Netflix. UFO is actually a story about not America, the world's secret war against aliens. As was The Invaders, which came a little bit earlier in America.
The Invaders. Oh, that scared the sloppy joes out of me, let me tell you.
I haven't seen as much of The Invaders as I would like to. I did get to see a big chunk of it because here in St. Louis at one point, our PBS station was running it. And what was it their little finger wouldn't bend because it was fake? That was the difference between us and the aliens?
Yeah, it was like that was an element of the show that, when you see it when you're really little, it scares you. But now you're like, what the hell? Like, why would that matter? But you're right. It was an element of, it was, and I think it was the little finger. And it's completely absurd. But the rest of the show, I mean, now, I don't know if it would hold up now. I haven't watched reruns. But for the time that it came out, I mean, God, I was dripping with paranoia. Just like, Outer Limits is another paranoia-inducing show, but more on the monster end. But Invaders was pretty well done.
But it's well after it was in the 60s. I think it was started in black and white and made the jump to color.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Quinn Martin production, so it had, I love a good Quinn Martin production. And it's a Quinn Martin production because they tell you often. But,
Yes, they always did. And Quinn Martin had stock in like the solar system.
but that seems to kind of, to me, be the outgrowth of the paranoia that started, in the 40s and 50s, and you see it in a couple movies. In the 50s, you get the Earth versus the Flying Saucers, with Ray Harryhausen special effects and things like that. But before that, I don't know that there was a huge amount of terror of aliens. Are you by any chance a listener to old radio shows?
Whenever I get the chance, which isn't often, but I'm very fond of them. I don't want to go too far into it, but yeah, there was a radio show that it may have inspired the TV series called One Step Beyond, which was an old black and white show.
It was
kind of like,
it was actually a separate show. Yeah.
Yeah, you know about it then. Okay.
Yeah.
And I have listened to recordings of, there were they were doing like adaptations of H.P. Lovecraft stories. Algernon Blackwood, who wrote The Willows, a very good weird fiction story about elemental spirits. I just can't think of the names of the damn shows, but I do listen once in a while because there's stuff all over the place on the internet.
Yeah, if you get a chance, or if anybody out there gets a chance to listen to X-1, and before that, what was the name of the show? It'll come to me eventually. There are two radio shows that were both done in the 50s. One is basically a reworking of the earlier one, but it's an anthology radio series from period magazine stories, usually Galaxy. And I'm often struck by how in those stories, when there are aliens, we being the Earthlings, a lot of times are already the bad guys. Even that early, because they do. I mean, they do an adaptation of Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles for one, and we do not come off well in the Martian Chronicles.
No, you talk about paranoia. Despite Bradbury's poetic gentleness reputation, there's some nasty stuff in that book. I mean, it's fantastic, but it's horrific.
But yeah, so if anybody gets a chance to check out X-1, and man, the other one, I should know this, but it's a great survey of kind of what was going on, and when you listen to that, it's really surprising what was in the science fiction at the time. As far as what we thought of technology, Dimension X, that was the earlier version of it. What was accepted? There are a huge amount of rockets. It's always struck me how few flying saucers, quote unquote, there were in science fiction for so many years.
You're right. Most of them are the classic, pointy cone rockets with the fins.
Oh,
you do not see a lot of discs.
Yeah, I mean, the shinier the better for a rocket, right?
Yeah, of course.
It's
polished aluminum.
Man, yes. Chrome. I think when I have a spaceship, it's going to be chrome. It's going to be chrome or nickel plated.
Right. Chrome is the way to ride, my friend.
Yes. But when you go back to Buck Rogers, there's a good one. Flash Gordon.
Oh, man.
Who were
sputtering rockets.
Exactly. And they were huge influences on science fiction. I think sometimes, and when we've been talking about it, there's a mistake of going back to saying, well, this is what so-and-so was writing about, the Shaver Mysteries was so enduring. But how many people were really reading those as opposed to Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon? They're in your newspaper every day. They've got movie series.
Like today, the visual stuff is always going to trump, people reading books, for good or ill. But back then, most people, they're not going to be thinking of, the Shaver Mysteries and the Darrows and underground stuff and Adamski. They're going to be watching Buck Rogers and Commando Cody.
Right. And those guys all had rocket ships,
Yes.
All had rocket ships. I wonder what the first flying saucer in media really was. The day the Earth stood still.
I don't know.
Had a saucer, right?
Yes. Yeah, and it was. I'm trying to think. Was it? It wasn't really an Adamski-shaped saucer with that cupola on top. But it kind of had beveled edges. And I'm talking about Earth stood still. And then there was Earth versus the Flying Saucers, where one of the saucers hits the Washington Monument.
Washington Monument, definitely. That's I think I want to say that's 55, 57, something like that.
Yeah.
Because that's Harryhausen.
And I know that Day the Earth Stood Still is actually, I know it was before I was born. It was like 51 or 52.
Right, and
directed by Robert Wise, who went on to direct The Haunting in like 62.
And it's actually based on a short story called Farewell to the Master. And in that story, it's not a flying saucer, it's an ovoid, an egg-shaped craft. Which has struck me. I think when we had forums, I wrote about that on the forums. That here's something interesting. It's not a rocket, but it's still not a flying saucer.
Some media manipulation there.
But then it's Kenneth Arnold. It's Roswell. There were a bunch of other little things happening at the time because, of course, Kenneth Arnold didn't see flying saucers. He saw things that moved like saucers. He saw boomerangs.
And he did drawings of them, and yet that remark about skipping like stones, and that got blown out of proportion. And look at the effect that's had.
Yeah, and then that's when the discs came, but people were already seeing, some discs right around then. And have you ever run across any reference to the term flying saucer actually predating Kenneth Arnold?
I don't think so. There is the earliest mention I know, and this is probably after. It's really close to right after Roswell. There's a novel that's just called The Flying Saucer by Bernard Schwartz. I'll never get his last name right, but his first name's Bernard. And it was basically it was a novel about using the UFO phenomenon, which of course they just called flying saucers, as a cover-up for a government conspiracy. And that's often been related as that is probably the first appearance of our use of the flying saucer theme in a fictional in a novel. But as far as like the term flying saucer being used before Arnold, I personally haven't run across anything. But there are reports, some of them ancient, of course they weren't saying flying saucer. They would say of egg-shaped objects, disc-shaped objects,
shields.
Shields, exactly, but never the words flying saucer that I've run across.
I do believe that it was used in newspapers at one point, possibly in England, before the Kenneth Arnold sighting. If anybody knows, if anybody could jump on to podcastufo.com, throw that in the chat room. There are definitely people in the chat room. So, like I said, it's been down, but it's back up again. We will take questions through here, and we're gonna talk about government here in a second. I would like to point out, because it has been pointed out to a chat room user by the name of Martin Willis, that I should announce that in the next couple of, or in a few weeks, Michael Shermer is going to be a guest on Podcast UFO. So even if people get mad at you today, Bill, for being some kind of disinformation debunker, they're going to all forget it when when he comes and makes people mad.
Well, that's good to know. There's some backup there.
But back to the government, we were starting to kind of move back towards the government and the government conspiracy theory. Very early in your book, I want to say it's actually possibly the introduction. You say that you believe it's a fact, in the format fact : that the government governments do not know what's behind the UFO phenomena. And I think a lot of people, when reading your book, if they read the introduction, right there, they're going to be like, what? What? Because there's a lot of people that hold truck with the government knowing more than we do, if not knowing the whole story. What is your thought? Why do you believe that governments do not know what's going on, or at least more than us, if that's the truth as well? I don't want to put words in your mouth. And why don't you believe that governments can keep a secret?
Okay. Well, the reason I wrote that is I think it is a fact that, number one, if anybody has data, just raw data on phenomenon, it's governments. And I think they have crap loads of it. But I don't think they know what it is, what it represents, and that's why I said that they don't really know the source of these things. The ones that, let's say, if there really are any, authentic unknowns, and by that, UFO does mean unidentified flying object, not necessarily extraterrestrial. But that's why I said that I don't think they do know. And that could be part of the another cover-up. They don't want the public to know, because it's admitting some kind of an impotence. Like, well, if you don't know what these things are, how can you protect us against terrorists and whoever else? And these days, of course, everything comes back to terrorism, no matter what. But that is why I wrote that. I think they have a lot of data, but they don't really know what to do with it, and it's been that way for a long time. My opinion, of course.
Now I've heard other people kind of say that it's it would cause this panic, and the government can't appear weak in the face of it and such. But it seems to me that the government deals with a lot of things it doesn't know the answer to necessarily.
Sure.
We don't know what we're going to do about fossil fuels. We don't know what we're going to do about the debt. There's a lot of unknowns. There are
a lot of things that matter a hell of a lot more than UFOs. I even have a chapter on it. The last chapter in my book is called "So What?" Like, what if this stuff has absolutely no relevance and it's completely incidental? It could still be real, but be incidental to our lives. Things like, fossil fuel programs. And the government has, I'm not somebody that's constantly stomping the head of the government. There are a lot of things they do that piss me off. And a lot of things they do I think that are great. But, what about, there are things that are also treated hazily, like, commerce is more important than solving fossil fuel problems and all this. So they don't always know what they're doing, and they are human beings. And, they're subject to fear as well. But I think as far as the UFO phenomenon goes, someone's got to be paying attention to reports. But I think these days, they're just more annoyed by it than anything. And now with drone technology, that's really throwing a lot of crap in the air. Literally.
Yeah. Drones. I love a good drone.
Don't we all?
So many of them are toys, and there are definite, there's definitely been hoaxes, purposeful hoaxes created with drones. We did a news story years ago about a museum creating a hoax with a drone outside of a baseball game in Canada to draw attention to one of their exhibits. So,
I have heard of that one. Wasn't there? There's video footage of that.
Oh yeah. So there's definitely things like that are going to happen. Again, I'm going to point out that something I said right at the top of the broadcast, that all of you who want to look for these things, who want to see something in the sky, such a good place to start is by knowing what's supposed to be there. So
absolutely,
go outside, get started, and like I think I might have even mentioned, get a pair of astronomy binoculars made for astronomy. You can get them for a lot cheaper than a telescope. They're a lot easier to use. You'd be surprised at what you could see with a $50 pair of astronomy binoculars, even in the city. And just get familiar with everything that's out there, because when it's all said and done, drone. 99% of what we're calling drones are toys, first of all, and they're not really that impressive.
Yeah, when you see them in the harsh daylight, you're like, well, this is a configuration of plastic and microprocessors and some lights, some propellers.
Yeah, but even if you see them in the dark, even if you see people, if you are familiar with what's around you, you can pick out things like. Now it's a lot harder to do on videotape because you get the flash effect of a light as opposed to what your eyes would have told you at the time.
Oh, sure, yeah, you're gonna have distortions.
Yes, but it's pretty easy to stand on the ground and go, that thing's not that high up. Therefore, that thing's really not that big. They do make a lot of them do make some noise,
Yeah.
But drone, and I'm a big fan of drones. I want real drones in America, but but not these toys. And I'm surprised they haven't caused more of an issue than they have.
I think that's yet to come, especially with like Amazon proposing this delivery system. I'm like, what? That is the stupidest idea. If you want to cause havoc, get drones delivering shit to people. That'll do it.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Here, back to history. Helicopters were a fairly new thing in the 40s. They were not widely used.
That's true. I don't think the first one even existed until it was like the Second World War, was it not?
Right, and we did not use them, widely in the war. It was Korea where we started widely using helicopters in the military. So I, where are the hysterical helicopter sightings?
Well, good point there. I mean, beyond the that's a whole other show, like the Jim Keefe Black Helicopters Over America deal. But as far as if you're speaking in terms of drones raising havoc, I just don't think that's started yet. And it worries me personally that of course they would have to fly below a certain threshold to avoid commercial aircraft. But then there's also excuse me. Laws, FAA laws against flying certain aircraft too low, and I'm positive because I've read this that they're trying to work out legislation for commercial drone usage.
Oh yeah, they definitely are, because there are some really legitimate great uses for real drones. If you're if you're a cattle rancher, right, and you have a drone that you can put up in the air, it has a sensor, and say, follow the fence until there's no fence and tell me what's happening. You don't have to have people riding your fences anymore.
That's another superb use for it.
You could have a drone fly through relatively long stretches of power line and monitor what's going through the power lines, read their EM fields very easily. I mean, there's a lot of really great legitimate uses for drones that could save a lot of people a lot of time, effort, and money. And a lot of those uses right now are being filled by helicopters. I will throw out there.
I was going to say, just not to intrude too much here. When I was living in outside of Pittsburgh for a while in a rural area of Pennsylvania, and there were UFO sightings in Westmoreland County where I lived. And it turned out that these were helicopters flying at night, looking at power lines and stuff. So yeah, there was a crossover there, and that's perfect use for drones. So one thing, they're a lot quieter, and I think people would get used to that. And it's also, as far as inspecting the lines, it's not as done all the time, but yeah, there was some confusion that was due to nocturnal inspection of electrical lines.
Well, see,
so, yeah, there's a lot of positive uses for drones.
Since I live in St. Louis, we're all really used to the police helicopters looking for the gunmen. So
yes.
we don't have those mistakes here. Believe it or not, we're actually halfway through the show, which seems like a good time to announce to anybody who's coming late that obviously Martin is still not here. He's out of the country. I'm Michael Lauck filling in. My guest tonight is Bill Grabowski, who has written, let me get the full name of your book here, Blacklight, Perspectives on Mysterious Phenomena. And that's what we're talking about. Martin's going to be back next week. Tonight, both hours are free for everyone. We do not have the new support platform up yet. It is coming soon. Look for it after Martin gets back next week. And Martin, if you are listening, we do hope you're feeling better with your sprained ankle. Also, a little other business before we jump back in. The chat room is open. It has been down lately, but it is open. So that's a great way to get in on the conversation. I will pass along questions from there. And also, if you want to call in, you can call in and talk to us at 603-967-4030. That's 603-967-4030. So just join in and be part of the conversation. Now, from the chat room, somebody did ask a while ago, all right, well, actually, here's two questions. We'll go with this since we've been talking about the government. Do you think that the government has nothing to disclose?
No, I don't think that. There are things they know, but then again, number one, do they need to disclose them? Should they? And I'm trying to put myself in their spot. Like, let's say I did know something that had to do with UFOs in any aspect. They would have to be so careful in how they said this. And I don't think, you brought this up earlier, I don't really think it would cause a panic if the government just said, hey, you know what, there's something here and it ain't us. They wouldn't say it that way, of course, but if they said, yes, we verified that, an object was spotted and, we saw it materializing or something along those lines. We know it is not one of ours. I don't think people would panic. I think it might cause some fear, but I think there'd be more fascination. And then, like everything else these days, it might slowly fade out if there wasn't some kind of escalation of sightings. I don't know. But I do think there are things that could be disclosed. For instance, like some of the earlier sightings that have sort of, been explained away, which causes another, faction of people's heads to explode. They probably could help out in that area with, okay, remember in 1952 with these radar sightings over the nation's capital? Well, that was nothing. That would help.
I mean, in a perfect world, I think disclosure would go something like, if they don't have the answers, all they have is a confirmation that there is something else, and we saw something zoom in past Pluto, swing around us once or twice, and take off, and we don't know what the heck that was. It would be nice to say, this is what was there. This is let's go figure this out. Let's go take our place in the universe. Let's go, have that be the new Apollo mission. Unfortunately, what I think might be more the case is if there's any indication of, if they know anything more about this, and if there is any threat, real or perceived, now more than ever, I just imagine, somebody in some agency that maybe we've heard of, maybe we haven't. Who knows, and who's responsible for deciding who gets to know, and looking at politicians. And I don't want to, I'm not going to say I'm for Hillary Clinton or against, but looking at this whole Hillary Clinton email server. Because one thing I will say is I have set up gaming servers for friends with more security than that server reportedly had for a pizza and a 6-pack. So... can you imagine if Herbert Hoover was alive today? Is he going to be saying, "Oh yes, obviously, this is the class I should be trusting with the real secrets of our government"? I do imagine that it would really be something that the government would want and could keep as a secret. But that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, it's been said, and probably by me, and maybe even on this show earlier, that there's some secrets you can't keep. But as far as in this narrow area we're talking about, like disclosure, and given like the levels of bureaucracy and who has to have approval from whom to like say something publicly. And then, the Hillary Clinton example of the FBI getting into the server and all that, it's like, okay, if those people are hassled, we're the public. And if they want us to know something, they're damn well going to tell us. And if they don't, they're not going to tell us, and nor is anyone else. Because it's a different kettle of fish these days since 9/11, especially, where everyone is frightened of what they say and how they say it, myself included. I mean, I try not to let it run my life, but as far as disclosure, yeah, maybe now it is possible where, if we really need to know something vital to our existence, they probably would tell us. That's a hard one to get your mind around.
We just had a great comment pop up in the chat room from Minnie Fang, and it's, since the government has lied so much in the past 50 years, would anyone actually believe them if they came out and disclosed what they knew?
Well, yeah, that's like the cry wolf deal. Like, yeah, what if they did say, you know what, extraterrestrials are real? A lot of us probably go, oh, yeah, right. We've watched the X-Files. Forget it, pal. We're not going to believe you.
Yeah, true. And I mean, yeah, you can't. That's a question that I don't know that I've ever heard discussed. But let's do some conjecture here. Let's say hypothetically, the government, the big capital G government, they know something large, and they're going to tell us in a fit of benevolence or whatever. Who would you pick? Who would you trust? Who would go out there and say, yes, this is what we know. This is how we know it. This is, why we're telling you. Who would you believe it from at this point?
It'd have to be Alec Baldwin. That was the first name that popped into my head. I don't know why. I don't know. Yakov Smirnoff.
Is he even still around? Is he still in Branson?
No, I don't know where he is. Maybe he attacked Martin, and that's why his ankle got hurt. I don't know.
But I mean, where who would you believe?
Exactly.
And besides just us, who would automatically not believe it if they did not know it to be true themselves, just because it was the United States saying it? If China came out tomorrow and had a UFO laid out in Tiananmen Square with bodies and diagrams, would you believe it?
Man, I'll tell you what. I would be. I think I would have a magnifying glass over my computer screen just to check that out, and maybe even try and figure out a way to get over there. Because part of me almost can believe if something did happen like that in China, that kind of would be the approach. Okay, here's what we have. Here's what it looks like, and it's in our possession. And yeah, I know you can fake a lot of things on the internet, but something of that scale, where obviously there would be thousands of people around it, I don't think that could be faked. But God, like, if the United States had to make some kind of a declaration like that, they would have to be, I almost could guarantee they would choose somebody that's well known and respected in the media. I don't think it would be, I was just being a wise ass when I said Alec Baldwin, but God, you never know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, even with the media, I mean, we don't have that Walter Cronkite, Edward R. Murrow,
You're right. Those days are gone.
Which it's just a big scary world, isn't it?
It seems to be, yes. And we're sitting on it.
Now, we talked before a little bit about your career and how this is not normally what you are writing about. This book came out in 2014, correct?
Yes.
Is this, are you one and done? Are you not going to revisit this till you think you have some answers? Are we looking at Blacklight 2 coming out later this month?
Good question. The thing is, unfortunately, I'm the guy with all the questions. I don't think I have any definitive answers. After I published this book, I thought, well, you've mined all your journals and people you've talked to, interviews and stuff like that, the material that went into this book. I don't think it's going to be a standalone. Like, yeah, that's the only one. But having said that, I think it's probably going to take me a while to write another nonfiction book about UFOs and paranormal phenomena, because so much has happened just between, it's not even a year yet since this book has been out. Just the way I think about things from reading others and then also just watching what's going on in the world, everything evolves so quickly, it's really hard for me personally just to keep up with even UFO phenomena, because there's so much hoaxing going on today, and mixed in with, as we mentioned before, like drone sightings, and then a regrettable, I can go to a lot of these websites, I don't want to mention any, where it's if you look at the comments, well, there was one about the Roswell slides, very well-known UFO writer, and God, I feel sorry for him, that would not end about these Roswell slides. And then when that came out, it was a photograph of a mummy, like, oh my God, look at all this time that was wasted. But the field's been that way since the 50s, and I realized that because they just didn't have the internet at that point. But to answer your question, I'm pretty sure that I'll write another book. I just don't know when that'll be. And I have been actually, I did start publishing on paranormal stuff back in the 80s, but it was in such a small press magazine called The Gate. And I believe the first issue I had anything in was an article about, it was an interview with Carlson, that's what it was. And there was also an article in there by Stan Gordon, who lived a few miles from me in Pennsylvania, who researched the Kecksburg UFO crash, and we really don't agree on a lot of stuff. But I did start writing about this a long time ago, and then stopped, and then started again in the early 2000s, and that stuff became Blacklight.
Now, let's talk about your voice for a second. You don't. I mean, we've said it here today. You are not a big fan of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. You're okay. What do you think of other people who are not fans of the extraterrestrial hypothesis? How do you? We've talked so much about how we're viewing the UFO phenomena. What about the skeptics and the debunkers? How do you assess the state of their nation right now? Do you have any of the problems that I think a lot of the listeners to this show would have with those communities?
Well, it's been said before, but I'll say it just to make it clear to you and to people listening, is that when it comes to the skepticisms, like I'm definitely I'm against the extremists, like the extreme believers in the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I'm also against the extreme skeptics who will not entertain any theory whatsoever about possibilities that we are being visited, whether it be physical craft from elsewhere, or from I guess where I go further away from skepticism is that I'm willing to entertain the possibility of parallel universes. But as far as the weak point in that theory is, well, okay, there probably are parallel universes. How do the beings from those universes get here? That's a big problem. And then the people behind that, actually, John Keel was one of them. He calls it the super spectrum and things of that nature. But he also couldn't get his mind around, well, okay, they could be in other universes, and they could be even human. But how would they get here? And now, physics seems to have a way around that. But to try to wrap your mind around that is difficult. And regarding skeptics, Philip J. Klass, who is now no longer among us, his was one of the first books I read too. It was called UFOs Explained, and it came out like 76 or 7. And I first thought, oh my God, this guy is unbearable. But I learned a lot about him, mostly just how to keep your head together. But I don't think he was right about anything. He seemed to be not open at all, even though he would say, okay, if you can show me this, evidence, I will open up. And I probably he was honest about that. But when someone came along with evidence that he really couldn't mess with, he seemed to back off. So I can't put myself in that camp. Robert Schaefer is a guy who's very skeptical, more so than me. I admire him, but I'm not on the extremes as far as skepticism goes. I think I'm more open to there being some possibility of, a genuine phenomenon.
So what would it take for you personally to say, oh, damn, aliens? Yes.
Wow, in my case, I'm a bad case. It would almost have to be like a very close encounter, so to speak, with some unusual entity. And then even if that happened, right away I'd probably be thinking, okay, I'm having, I just had a cerebral accident, and I'm having a stroke, and I'm hallucinating or something, and I would hope someone else is around me to see this thing. That's what it would have to take.
The little thrown out stroke hypothesis.
It would have to be something like that. I'm having temporal lobe epilepsy right now.
Well, okay. So is there no organization then you would trust? I mean, it would have to be personal for you. Until you feel the cold steel of the probe, you're not going to buy into it.
Yikes. Thinking of that again, it would depend on who. Okay, if you're looking for a name, I guess if someone like Jacques Vallée says, okay, here's the evidence I have, he would have to show you the evidence, right? He is someone I would trust. I will go over the edge there and say, yes, I will trust Jacques Vallée. If he says, okay, I have evidence and here it is, I would check it out, because I don't trust anyone, 100% who does. But if it would be anyone, it would be him.
But,
or there's a guy who has a website called the UFO Trail, Jack Brewer. His opinion, I would trust.
But what about government agency or governments? If let's pull. I'm trying to think of a fairly neutral country, and other than Switzerland, and I'm really not thinking of something that's not going to jaundice people one way or another. So let's just say with Switzerland, let's say the Swiss tomorrow came out and said, we're sick of keeping other people's secrets. This is what we know about it, and they're all coming from Alpha Centauri or the Pleiades or wherever. how much stock do you place in something like that?
Well, if it came from the Swiss, I have to admit, I probably would be possibly a little predisposed to accept it. Again, it would have to be they would have to present something anyone making a disclosure would. And I would definitely pay deep attention to it. And coming from the Swiss, yeah, I would probably want to trust them because they just seem so damn friendly. And I know everyone says that, but it seems to be true from people I know who've traveled there. I probably would have a little predisposition to trust them.
So if the Russians come out tomorrow and say we captured this UFO in whenever they're supposed to have captured UFOs, I'm not up on my Russian ufology. That's one you're gonna give the cockeye to.
Man, I don't know, because we're having such a it seems we have kind of a lopsided relationship with Russia these days. They could say we have American Martin Willis in custody. His ankle is hurt. We have UFO too, and I don't know if I would trust them. I trust them I trust the intellectual nature. Okay, they seem to really be like in the '60s. They had all this psychic research, and they were damn serious about it. If you've ever read any,
psychic research behind the Iron Curtain. Is that the name of the book?
Absolutely,
love that book.
Yeah, so you do know. Yeah, they were deadly serious about it, and I think that the Americans were as well. I think the Russians were like, wow, they really got into that. So if they were to make a disclosure, man, I don't know. I'd be hesitant, but then I think that they would also want to be. They would want to be the ones that have the pride of having made this disclosure. However you want to look at it. So I might actually be willing to trust them because they would want to be known just like we would. Hey, we're the guys who got the Holy Grail.
The name of the podcast is Podcast UFO, but I'm the guy holding the mic, everybody. So I'm gonna deviate from UFOs for a second again, and go this way. You talk in the book, Black Lights. You like the term. You seem to like the term Fortean. I mean, you do kind of refer to his body of general strangeness.